In this video, I'm going to use Desmos.com to show you how to calculate summary statistics and also create graphical displays of histograms and box plots from a list of data. So I actually have the lesson on standard deviation pulled up to the right here, and we're going to go through the summary statistics, including the population standard deviation of what you just calculated by hand. So once we launch Desmos, we want to just go to the calculator section. And so what we have to do first is type in our list of data for these 10 data values. And to do that, there's a couple of things you can do. One is we can just use brackets and type the data separated by commas. And then close your brackets, which notice it already has a bracket. And then it says I have 10 elements listed. So if I click down to the second row, I can actually do something with this. However, sometimes it's easier to actually name the list so that you can reference that name later. So I'm just going to call this A, and I'm going to say that A is equal to this list. Now, there's a second way that we can actually enter the data, especially if you have a large set of data, or maybe your students have captured data in a Google form. And so if you have data listed, let's say in Excel, which I already typed these in, then you can just highlight those. And if you copy, I can go back over to Desmos and click paste. So it gives me the exact same list. And I'm going to actually call that B. So it should be the same list of data. And either way is very quick to enter. Now, we're going to first calculate the summary statistics. So what we're going to be looking at is the mean and the population standard deviation. So in 1B, you might note that we actually got the answer 1.418. So when we calculate the population standard deviation, we should be getting the same value. So what we want to do is actually open up this keyboard, and we want to go to functions. So here you have trig functions, stats functions, we have distributions, and also miscellaneous. So for the stats features, we're going to use the stats menu. And if I wanted to calculate the mean, I could just click mean. Whoops, I guess I need to go on to the next row, row 3. I can click mean and tell it which list. So I'm just going to use list A since that was the data, and it already calculates it as 21.7. So if you'll notice from the mu that we had on our lesson, we got 21.7. Now, we also want the population standard deviation. And so if I go back to the functions, I want to choose the standard deviation P. So again, I'm going to tell it list A, and here is my not rounded number, but if I do round, I will get 1.418 like we got on 1B. Now, there's also another standard deviation function that I just want to explain here. And this is actually I guess I need to go to the next row so I don't mess that up. That is actually the sample standard deviation. So under just standard deviation, again, A, we're going to get 1.494. Now, it's the same calculation as the population, except this denominator right here, instead of it being n, it's actually going to be n minus 1. So oftentimes in AP Stats, we use the sample standard deviation, but in this lesson, the sigma is the population standard deviation. So that's what we want to compare. Now, if you want to also create graphical displays such as histograms or box plots, if you know the name of the command, such as histogram, you can tell it what list and it will calculate or it will sketch the graph. But if I go into functions, I'm going to move on to the distribution. And by the way, if you wanted the 5-number summary, it would consist of minimum. It would have a quartile, and you would tell it which one. So let me show you the quartile function here. So if I call it quartile, I would need to tell it which one. So if I wanted the first quartile, I would have to tell it A. Then I would get Q1 is 21. And if you've already done this on the TI-84, you can compare that to Q1. So if you wanted the quartiles, it would be either a Q1 or a Q3. Excuse me. So you would have to tell it the list and then tell it which quartile. Also part of the 5-number summary, in addition to minimum, we'd have a Q1 and a Q3 would be the median and also the maximum. So if you needed the 5-number summary, you could calculate those. Okay, but for the graphical displays, we actually want to go to the distribution here. So it says visualizations. You can do a dot plot, but we're going to look at a histogram. So I'm going to choose histogram. You can just type the word histogram and tell it where the data is. And on the TI-84, we actually did a bin width of 2. So I'm going to do a comma 2, and it's going to change my bin width. Okay, so you'll notice that there is not a histogram over here. I'm actually going to minimize this. And so the reason why is because the scale is off. This goes from -10 to 10 on the X, and we know that our data goes from 19 as the minimum up to 24 for the maximum. So if I go to the graph settings, I can actually change that. So I'm going to change this to be a couple of values below the minimum. So I'm going to do 17, and I want to go a little bit higher than the maximum. So I'm going to go up to 28. And if you'll remember from the TI-84, we actually had 3 bins in our histogram, and I didn't have to change anything on the Y because I can see the top of those. So if you'll look, we have the Y scale. This is 2, so this means 2 data values are from 19 to 21. And you can actually step by 1 if you want each of those X values labeled. You could also make this 1 for the Y. And so we look in the middle bin, which is 21 to 23, and it goes up to 23, and it's going to have 5 data values there. So you can play around with this a lot and change the scale to really determine what you want to see. If I wanted the bin width to be 1, I would just change it here, and then I would have the bin width of 1. So it looks like we would have, it's going from 18 and a half up to 19 and a half. But 1 data value is going to be listed right here of 19. So each of these were integers. Now, if I want the same display or same data, but a different graphical display, I could take the histogram off. I can't really look at a box plot and histogram together. I can either type in the word box plot on the next line or row, or I can go to functions. And so I'm going to choose dot or box plot right here. I'm going to tell it what data, and it gives us a couple of other options. It says offset and height. I usually don't change these, but what you can do is look at the minimum value of 19. Q1 is going to be 21. Median is going to be 22, Q3 is 23, and finally the maximum is 24. So it gives you a really quick way to create some graphical displays and also to itemize which summary statistics. You just need to either pull up the functions and let it call up the titles, or if you are familiar with those, calculate those by just typing those in. Again, it's helpful to just call the list a letter or a name so that you can easily access that later.